come and go, but they don't know that you are my beautiful.
So here's a fun fact about me. My first ever concert that I ever attended was the Backstreet Boys Never Gone tour in 2005. I was 7 years old at the time. My mom and some family friends and I went to the Jones Beach Amphitheater, which if you don't know is a theater on the waterfront on Long Island, New York, and the band that was opening for the Backstreet Boys was the Jonas Brothers. And this was before they got picked up by Disney. This is before anyone even really knew who they were. And so I've always felt very cosmically linked to them in a way, because since then I've been to probably over 100 shows, and technically the Jonas Brothers is the very first concert that my little brain ever got to perceive. And some years later, I was very much the target demographic for the Disney machine in its golden era, so to speak. And so after following their career for so many years, I'm still very fascinated by their longevity, especially because they're not a traditional boy band. And for better or worse, they still make headlines today. So indulge me for a few minutes, my friends, as we analyze the entire history, timeline, and cultural impact of the Jonas Brothers, going places that no late 90s Gen Zer on the internet has ever gone before. Okay, so brief but obvious origin story. The Jonas Brothers are a band of 3 brothers who hail from the sovereign wasteland of New Jersey, and they started making music together in 2005. Before they essentially became Disney property, they bounced around quite a bit trying to get their first album done, in the meantime touring with bigger acts such as Jump 5, Kelly Clarkson, Jesse McCartney, and of course the Backstreet Boys. They also toured with notable Disney acts like Ali and AJ and the Cheetah Girls. And from their debut, they started to catch on in the realm of children-friendly media, which made sense given their image at the time. They were pretty young and presented as pretty family-friendly. In 2006, their song Mandy was actually first featured on Nickelodeon in the television film Zoe 101 Spring Breakup, and the group's music was also featured on Cartoon Network's Friday night programming Block Fridays. Eventually, they definitely got pulled into the Disney orbit, starting out doing covers like Yo-Ho, A Pirate's Life for Me from Pirates of the Caribbean, and they did the theme song for American Dragon Jake Long. Once they were officially signed to Hollywood Records in 2007, the marketing strategy there seemed to be have them do every cover of every song imaginable and put them on TV constantly, and that's what they did. They covered a couple more Disney songs. They also covered Kids of the Future for the Meet the Robinsons soundtrack, and for those who don't know, Year 3000 is a cover of an older song. They sang the national anthem at the 2007 White House Easter egg roll, and while their album was rolling out in August of that year, they appeared quite frequently across the Disney Channel, even appearing in their own crossover episode of Hannah Montana. This is where we get into the hits you definitely know territory, SOS, Hold On, and they toured around with this material for a little while, all leading up in anticipation for the height of their popularity, in my opinion, their third studio album, A Little Bit Longer, and of course,
for anyone with a future on the stage, there's only one place to spend the summer.
You're going to Camp Rock.
How does one describe Camp Rock in 2023? It is a film that definitely tried to capitalize on the success of High School Musical, that's for sure. It's about a performing arts camp, and also about class, kind of. And Demi Lovato is in it, and Joe Jonas plays the main guy, and the other 2 Jonas Brothers are also there. And if you can't tell, I haven't watched Camp Rock since like before my frontal lobe fully developed. I still low-key remember all the songs though. No more hiding who I wanna be. This is... You're the voice I hear inside my head, the reason that I'm singing. Basically, if you were a kid my age at the time and you didn't know the Jonas Brothers before Camp Rock, you definitely did now. And with that amount of spotlight, especially on 3 kids who were pretty young, all things considered, cracks in the foundation start to show. And this is where I'm going to argue that a lot of the treatment that the Jonas Brothers received post-2008 was very unwarranted, and if you look back and analyze it, a little creepy. Let's start with the elephant in the room, the purity rings. So there have been a lot of rumors about the Jonas Brothers purity rings over the years, and I think the general lore that people accepted for a long time was that Disney actually forced them to do it to make it part of their image, and I thought this for a long time too, but according to them, that's actually not the case. In an interview with James Corden in 2019, they revealed that they started wearing the purity rings because their dad was a pastor and they were pretty active in the church as part of their youth. If you're unfamiliar, by the way, purity rings are a tradition in the Christian faith where men, and sometimes women, I think, will wear rings to symbolize that they are not going to have sex until marriage. The band didn't actually talk about their purity rings until one of their first ever interviews when an interviewer asked about them and they didn't really know what to say, and so the interviewer was like, oh, I'm just gonna tell everyone that you guys are in a cult, and that's when they started speaking up about the purity rings. They didn't necessarily want to make that a part of their image. Fans and the media went so wild when they heard this, and in retrospect that's really weird considering that at the time they ranged from like 14 to 17 years old, and it's very bizarre for so many adults to be so interested in the sex lives of literal teenagers. And when the Jonas Brothers talk about this now and they poke fun at the purity ring bit, they definitely bring this up that they thought it was weird that so many people were intrigued by that. And once you get your own South Park bit dedicated to it, unfortunately it becomes part of your lore for life.
I'm ready to get it on, but there's no getting on till I'm ready. Too soon, slow down, take it easy on the girl. I need your love, baby.
But yeah, in my opinion, the purity ring thing is definitely what kicked off the Jonas Brothers rumor mill and corresponding hate train at the time, because at that time, it was super popular to just dunk on anything that teenage girls liked because it was the dominant zeitgeist. And you know, three brothers, Christian upbringing, purity rings, managed by Disney, it was all the perfect storm for the funniest joke of 2008, heard in lunchrooms around America. The Jonas Brothers were actually gay. Now walk with me for a sec, all the way back to 2008. It is the height of the financial crisis, recession core, the Wii just came out. And the funniest fucking thing that you could do as a fourth grader at the lunch table or at recess was to look at some girl's Justin Bieber lunchbox or Jonas Brothers J14 magazine that they brought into school that day and go, they like boys. Chalk this up to the humor of the time, sure, whatever, but yeah, after the purity ring rumors, it was a very big thing to just call the Jonas Brothers gay. Because everyone knows that if they're wearing purity rings to symbolize how they don't want to have sex, that obviously means that they don't want to have sex with a human woman ever, duh. And I'll be real, did their look at the time scream masculinity? No, but pretty much all of the boy bands and male celebrities of that era were dressing pretty metrosexual anyway. That's just what the stylists were doing at that time. Meanwhile, in reality, it seemed like the Jonas Brothers were pulling left and right. There were constantly headlines about who in the teen media world they were dating. But before we get to that part of the story, I did briefly want to touch on the standing of the Jonas Brothers fandom, because like most boy bands where you pick a bias or a favorite, that definitely was the case with Nick, Kevin, and Joe, and you definitely had a favorite of the three, and unfortunately for Kevin, it was probably Nick or Joe. For me, it was Joe. But hey, I'm just one person, my human experience is subjective, so I'm gonna call up some of my friends and see who they used to main as Jonas Brothers stans. Which one was your favorite? Like, were you a Nick stan, a Joe stan, or a Kevin stan?
I was a Nick stan.
You were a Nick stan?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for your service.
Of course.
Bye, Queen.
It was Joe, because I was kind of into the bad boys. Maybe up until like sophomore year of college, I was definitely into scummy guys.
Oh no!
It's in line with me. It's in line with my childhood trauma.
I'm gonna have to say Nick was my favorite. Well, when Disney Channel said he had diabetes, I was so upset and thought he was gonna like die. Like, 7-year-old me was shaking.
So that made you bonded to him. That made you.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was good marketing on their part. Damn. Who was your favorite Jonas brother as a child? Was it Nick, Kevin, or Joe?
It was Nick.
You were a Nick girl?
I liked his curly hair.
You liked his curly hair?
Yeah.
I think it's because I would say I'd like Nick so I wouldn't be, like, basic, because everyone seemed to like Joe. But then as we got older, it seemed like everyone liked Nick. But, yeah, anyway, I would say Joe, I guess.
You're a Joe girl.
You're not gonna believe me, but it was Kevin.
It wasn't actually Kevin!
Yeah, nobody fucking likes Kevin, but I can fucking stand by Kevin. Joe was like, oh, he's the bad boy, and he was in Camp Rock. He was the star in Camp Rock. Demi wanted him, and then Nick was like,
"Aw, he's the little cute one with diabetes. Aw, we love Nick." And I'm like, man, fucking Kevin's there too. I felt bad. Kevin was my guy.
So Kevin was your guy because you felt bad
Because he
for
was
him.
left out.
But yeah, despite all the rumors about them being gay and people online trying to constantly emasculate them, Joe and Nick in particular had a pretty storied dating history in Hollywood. Joe famously dated Taylor Swift and eventually ended up dating Demi Lovato after Camp Rock, and Nick at one point dated Miley Cyrus, which seems like forever ago now. And he also apparently dated Selena Gomez, which I didn't know. I guess the last thing I want to talk about before the Jonas Brothers entered their whole hiatus era was the Disney TV series Jonas, then known as Jonas LA for season 2. Jonas was a pretty simple concept for a Disney Channel sitcom that aired in May of 2009. Apparently, the initial plot for this sitcom actually was that they were spies and they were famous band members to try to cover up the fact that they were spies. But I guess that script and production got pretty inhibited during the 2007 writer's strike, and so they kind of scaled it back to just be about this fictional band and this fictional universe trying to balance their lives of being regular teenagers while also being famous.
What are you doing? Practicing my flips. Gotta get back in shape for the tour.
Well, you didn't quite stick the landing. It's a good thing Big Man's petunias cushioned your fall.
Yeah, well, laugh it up now, brother, but I'm gonna get my flip back, and you'll see, all the fans love me the most.
You gonna clean this up? No?
I didn't really watch Jonas or Jonas LA, I don't remember much of it to be honest with you, but the thing I find the most interesting is that Disney kids used to have to be a jack of all trades. They had to sing, act, do comedy, dance, whereas every time Disney gave the Jonas Brothers an opportunity to act, they basically just played fictional versions of themselves as musicians. They just played different fictional bands. And don't get me wrong, they were a good band then, and I think they're a good band now. They have a lot of musical talent, and the Disney producers clearly tried to play on that strength every time they were featured in a different type of role. But at the end of the day, they were a band cosplaying as child actors, and I think that became clear as their career progressed post-hiatus.
I'm wondering, amongst the three of you, who's the biggest trash talker? Who do you think's the biggest trash
Joe
talker?
is, but he's got no game.
Definitely.
Just saying.
True.
That's so
very
funny they
true,
say that
true.
because,
Can you just tell them who's number one right now?
well, you're number one right
But
now.
who beat you in the last competition?
Okay, but you're saying he's the biggest trash talker, but you were the first one to say something there.
Oh.
Booyah!
After the release of their next album, Lines, Vines, and Trying Times, the Jonas Brothers split up to work on themselves a little bit. Joe released his debut album Fast Life, Nick went on a 2011 tour with his band Nick Jonas and the Administration, and Kevin actually went on to study music production. There were rumors around this time that they had formally split up the band for good, although that was never really confirmed. Around this time, they also had a reality TV series on E! Called Married to Jonas that chronicled the story of Kevin Jonas and his marriage to his new wife Danielle. Nick and Joe were also involved in that project. They eventually did try to go back on tour in 2012 and tried teasing some new music along the way, but that whole experience was actually pretty short-lived. In October of 2013, the band canceled 23 tour dates between October and December, and they cited a deep rift within the band over creative differences. Jumping ahead a little bit in time, Nick actually did give an interview where he gave the reason for their breakup. He basically chalked it up to the fact that their shows weren't selling as well as they used to, they didn't have a lot of passion for the music that they were putting out at the time, and so he went to his brothers and said that he thought that they should go on more solo journeys and have a split for a little while. He said it didn't go so well, and he actually feared that Joe and Kevin would never speak to him again. I think this actually ended up being really good for the band though. They made some really good stuff during their time apart. Joe joined DNCE and their famous song is Cake by the Ocean, but they also have a lot of pretty fun stuff that I tend to enjoy. And Nick released Jealous, which is one of the best pop tracks of the last 10 years. And I think for the most part, that's where everybody expected this story to end, right? All three brothers were doing their own separate things, going about their own separate lives with their own separate relationships, until 2019, when they dropped the song Sucker.
I'm a sucker for you. Say what you anywhere blindly.
The Jonas Brothers' 2019 comeback was probably one of the best rebrands for a band or artist in the last 20 years or so. And the reason I say that is because they had a lot going against them during this time, right? Everybody knew them as like a meme-y kind of Disney band that was really for nostalgia only. And a lot of their older music, as great as it was, definitely sounded a little immature, a little over the top, and so it was so smart for them to come back with this single that is so modern and sounds like it could just be plucked into pop radio and there's no gimmick there really. They looked clean and fresh like adults. They had great stage confidence. It was all really well done, and that's difficult with things like nostalgia rebrands or reboots. Audiences aren't always wanting to buy into something like that, but I think with the Jonas Brothers and Sucker, it worked really well. That same year, they released their album Happiness Begins, which did really well on the charts for them, and then they embarked on the Happiness Begins tour, and they performed 92 shows around the world. Then in 2023, they released their next album, The Album, and they've been touring around since then. They actually were in the news for a big meme where they brought out the Planet of the Bass duo during their concert, which was pretty funny. So theoretically, I have caught you up to present day, and that's where this story should end, right? However, the Jonas Brothers have also been in the news for different reasons in the last couple of days. And the main reason is that everyone is mad at Joe Jonas. So I've waited until now to really dig into the Jonas wifey lore, and I've said this before, I don't normally like talking about celebrity couple stuff because it doesn't really interest me in terms of a full story and scope of a band or artist. However, I am rather impressed with how much good fortune Joe Jonas has lost within the last, 7 days, and I think it is worth exploring. To catch you up really quickly, Kevin is married to his wife Danielle Jonas and they have 2 kids together. Nick is married to his wife Priyanka Chopra, who is a well-known Indian actress, and Joe is married to Game of Thrones actress Sophie Turner, and they have 2 kids together. For the most part, the Jonas relationships have stayed out of the tabloids and the spotlight, and that's pretty remarkable, all things considered. In fact, the most discourse I've ever seen about Nick or Kevin in this context is that one time Danielle said on a podcast that she feels a little pressure in comparison to the other Jonas wives because she's not a super famous celebrity or actress, and that's super valid, and people were generally supportive of that. And with Nick, there's this whole conspiracy theory that his relationship with Priyanka Chopra is just PR. And like, I get it, they do kind of seem like a very random celebrity couple, but I also can't think of any kind of PR, mutual, symbiotic relationship that would benefit either of them to get married and stay married for this long. Okay, so in the beginning of this month, it was announced that Joe Jonas and Sophie Turner would be separating. Which shouldn't be that big of a deal considering that people in Hollywood get divorced literally all the time, right? But along with this announcement, it seemed like we almost started learning a little too much about the inner workings of Joe and Sophie's relationship, which was unusual considering that up until this point of their divorce announcement, we had never really heard any of that before. It seemed like every day for a week straight, new rumors were hitting TMZ about how Joe Jonas was taking care of the couple's kids full time, and that Sophie was going out and partying all the time. It was very strange. And if you're unfamiliar with the cycle of how these rumors hit the press, if you see the phrase "a source close to the family," that usually means that the PR team for the celebrity is leaking information to the press themselves, which led people to ask, why would Joe Jonas's team try to spin Sophie as a bad mother? Especially because when these statements were coming out, people were often going through other past interviews and finding contradictions to that information. For example, a lot of these statements tried to depict Sophie as a party girl, where in multiple interviews she says that she's a homebody and she likes to stay inside. And I know nobody wants to hear it, so I'm not gonna dive too far into it, but this is 100% a consequence of the Amber Heard trial last year. During that whole situation, Johnny Depp's PR team basically performed a masterclass in spinning a narrative in favor of himself, which is the first time that has basically been successfully done since the Me Too movement in 2018. And that's not to say that Joe Jonas's PR team is being particularly insidious here. Johnny Depp's PR team was working overtime to cover up like actual crimes and history of him being a shitty, abusive person. And this is definitely not that, but the tactics in terms of the PR response are the same, except this time it is quite literally backfiring on Joe. My guess here is that Joe's PR team tried to do a bare bones version of the Johnny Depp PR strategy, not because he did anything illegal or severe, but because Joe has a reputation for being a fuckboy. For example, I mentioned a bit ago that Joe Jonas and Taylor Swift used to date, and that relationship ended very famously because Taylor Swift has been rather vocal about the fact that he dumped her over the phone in a 20-second phone call when she was 18 years old. And let me tell you, Swifties never forget. Since this has all sort of backfired on social media, Joe Jonas has addressed it actually on tour on stage, where he said this.
If you don't hear from these lips, don't believe them, okay?
So yeah, now you're all caught up to the present day. I consider myself a Jonas Brothers historian after this video, but for the sake of streamlining the story, there is one aspect that I felt like I left out, and I feel like I need to include it at the end of this video. And that is the TikTok of Frankie the Bonus Jonas.
I burned
my purity ring because I masturbated a hentai and I wanted to have sex with someone, so I burned it in the fire to get rid of my debt to God.